Hey Rockstars, Lid Shaw, and I'm joining you from NAMM 2022 at the Soundtheory booth with Eddie, and we're going to talk about the Gullfoss plugin. How are you doing, Eddie?
I'm great. Nice to see you. Yeah.
Nice to see you too, man. So tell us a little bit about what you guys do, and we'll jump in and take a look at this.
Awesome. So we released Gullfoss back in 2018. That's the blue one that you see behind me. And then since then, we've released two other editions, Gullfoss Live, which is a low latency live edition, and Gullfoss Master, which is perfect for mastering applications. And it has a little bit higher latency in CPU, but quality-wise, everything has been totally maxed out and optimized.
Awesome. Well, let's zoom in and we'll take a look at this very cool plugin that you guys have created. So basically, what are we looking at here?
So when you first instantiate Gullfoss, the 5 parameters along the top are all set to 0. The 2 main parameters here are recover and tame. So right now we have a piano loop going through Gullfoss, but nothing's happening. It's essentially the same thing as being bypassed. As I bring up recover, you can see in this case there wasn't a lot of low and high-end information in the piano, so it's kind of consistently trying to recover those frequencies.
So basically what we're looking at here is this is boosting up the lows and certain frequencies and then the highs to kind of give a better EQ curve to that piano sound because it interpreted it as sort of missing from the original track?
Right, it could be sort of like a little bit band limited, but in the mid-range you can almost see it's following where the piano player is playing and it's recovering those notes that might have not been so well represented to begin with. If I bring recover back down to 0 and we bring up tame, almost the opposite's happening where we see that notes in the mid-range that might have been a little bit too dominant, those are now getting tucked down, they're getting cut, and you'll see this gentle lift here. Part of that is just bringing up some of the brightness because the original recording might have been a little bit dull. The other part of that is we have perceptual loudness compensation. So every time you use the bypass button up here, you're not going to be fooled with volume differences. You're only going to hear those EQ changes. Bias and brighten are secondary parameters. So on their own, they don't do anything. You have to use tame or recover or both before you gain access to those parameters. In general, when you highlight a parameter, the corresponding meter is highlighted. So the recover meter is the upper half here, the tame meter is the lower half, and bias is the full side there, and then brighten is down at the bottom there. So if I have both recover and tame, bias is essentially, it's pointing negative right now. That means in borderline cases, it's favoring taming instead of recovering. If I do a positive bias value, you can see that little meter went up and it's almost null. That means in borderline cases, it's equally doing recover and tame moves. I can keep going and say, do more recover, or I could bring it back down. Brighten is a similar thing. Let's say I want the piano to be dark. I want to maintain that warmth that I originally had. I can go negative with the brighten, and we see down here it's actually pointing left. Anytime the brighten meter is pointing left, that means it's perceived as less bright compared to the original audio. And then the opposite's also true. If I go positive with brighten, it's now pointing to the right, which means the processed audio is brighter than the original audio. So that's a nice feature so you can maintain equal brightness. You can also use these range limiters if you want Gullfoss to omit processing on certain parts of the spectrum. The cool thing is these limiters can pass through one another. So if we don't want the mid-range to be processed, we can just drag them through one another, and now we're just processing low and high-end information.
Okay, this is awesome. So if I understand this correctly, when it's wide open, then it's addressing all the frequencies in this particular sound. And then as you swipe those red markers over, you're excluding all this information up here, right?
Yes.
And then you can exclude low end as well. So you can kind of have it focus on a certain band of area of, whether it's the harsh mids or whether it's the area where the S-ing is on a vocal or something, and you want it to just address those, or you can exclude those so that it's doing the lows and the highs, but it's not messing with your mid-range.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And the red coloring here is actually a gradient that indicates how quickly that processing kind of tapers off. It's not that straight line where it just stops processing at some crossover. It's a gradual, very natural, transparent thing. And you'll notice there is still some activity here. That's from the loudness compensation. So it's essentially maintaining the energy. If you do a relative cut, it's going to do a gentle lift somewhere else. That way the loudness is maintained. The last parameter here is boost. Boost is a global parameter. So,
and that's this guy right up here, right?
Right up there. So I can actually zero out all the other parameters just to show you what boost is doing. If I go positive with boost, this is the closest thing to maybe like Fletcher-Munson human hearing curves. It's essentially, if we have a boost of 0, it's like a virtual listener is 1 meter away from a point source. And when we go positive with boost, we're moving that virtual listener closer to that point source. It's like a microphone with a proximity effect, right?
Right, in the same way that human hearing gets a little bit more of a low-end boost and a little bit more of a high-end boost as we get closer to a sound source.
Exactly, and with boost you can even go negative if you want to be further from that virtual point source. So there are some unexplored things that I'm still learning every day too. You could technically do depth staging with boost if you're really clever about it and you automate it in the right way.
Awesome. Well, that's really got a ton of cool features in it. And I've been using this in my studio and had a chance to check it out. And I've noticed that it's really fun to just crank things up. Sometimes you go a little too far and then you back it up a little bit and then you find that sweet spot. But what's interesting to me is I always notice if I put it on a full mix, for example, maybe I've already got the mix where I want it, and then I'm like, oh, now let me enable Gullfoss. I can bring it up just a little bit, and then right at that moment where you're like, I'm not sure if this is really doing anything, and then you turn it in and out, and you're like, nope, it sounds a little bit better with it in there.
Yeah, it's the last little few percents that you need to just finish off the mix, for sure.
Okay, cool. So then just to quickly recap, Rockstars, you have the recover, which is to enhance that sort of like low frequencies and high frequencies and excitement in the sound. You have the tame, which is addressing the stuff that you're not really liking in your sound already, and it's kind of helping to address that. So great for harshness in tracks and making things sound more pleasant, you know. And then the bias is adjusting between the two. The brighten is to just say like, that's all fine and dandy, but let's make this whole thing a little bit more bright and exciting. And then boost is just more or less of all of that, right?
Yeah. Generally, you work left to right and kind of dial it in that way. Less is more. Smaller settings are definitely more than enough to hear the difference. Maybe not at NAMM, but in your own home studio, it's a lot easier.
All right, and then I know we don't necessarily need to zoom in on it, but you have a new sidechain feature as well, which basically allows you to do things like, for example, if this whole thing was on the mix and you were printing your mix this way and then you decided you wanted to print stems later of the individual drums, the basses, the guitar, the basses, listen to me, the one bass, the guitars and stuff like that, it would act differently, except that you can now sidechain the way this responds from the whole mix so that your stems are all going to have the same EQ curve that they would have had going through the Gullfoss. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So when I enable the sidechain button, I don't have a sidechain routed right now. So Gullfoss is listening to essentially nothing, but applying those changes to this where it's inserted. So you could have an instrumental bus and then send the vocal as a sidechain, and it would essentially carve out spots for your vocal and help it sit better in the mix. And then, yeah, as you mentioned with stem exports, sidechain is a really useful feature.
Okay, awesome. Well, groovy. Well, thanks so much for showing us all this stuff, Eddie. Where should the Rockstars go check this out if they want to learn more about it?
You can check it out at soundtheory.com. There's a free 2-week trial. If you need extra trial time, just write into support. It'll go right to me. I can get you a trial extension. And we have a NAMM coupon code. It's NAMM 2022, all capital letters. That should get you 30% off Gullfoss.
Awesome. Thanks for showing us. Rockstars, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the like button for this video if you enjoyed that, and hit the notification bell, and we'll see you guys around our YouTube channel, and see you in the next video. Cheers.